I am kind of intentionally shifting the combo over to some of the anti-human trafficking stuff, but and I want to talk about a few different scalable workflows that we've had. Once you got the girl or the pimp, the girl being the victim or the pimp, into a different scenario, we just had so much, or like a different platform or a different communication medium. We had so many different new avenues for attribution because they just didn't have the time to do the OPSEC. They didn't have the time to think about what are the unintended consequences of being on this new platform. They just wanted to move their product or move their messaging as fast as possible. This new platform enables XYZ. That does give us better opportunity, right? So like we started seeing this when Elliot and I were working on a lot of anti-human trafficking processes and curriculum and stuff like that. But I'm going to talk about one very simple workflow for folks that are doing anti-human trafficking investigations is looking at the phone number that's tied to an ad, right? Because the girl has to have the ad, or the pimp or the girl, and that phone number is usually controlled in some way by her handler or the trafficker. Attributes on that phone number or what can give us a really good insight into either this is a victim, or a human trafficking victim or sex worker, right? And so looking at the carrier settings that are tied to the phone and the platform that the phone is on is very helpful. So what are the carrier settings? That would be, I would say, look for, is it a cell phone? Is it a data provider? Is it voice over IP? So typically the traffickers or the handlers are going to try to treat these girls in a way that they can control their communication medium the most they possibly can. So the girl's going to be in a hotel with Wi-Fi, right? But a lot of the additional things that would come with that may not work. Like, she may not have a cell phone, right? But she's got wireless access to communicate data. And the app that they're using typically, kind of, if you look at the carrier settings, it can tell us whether this is a VoIP app or tied to an actual application from the vendor. And then you start looking at that and you start seeing, hey, like most, a good more than 80% of the trafficking victims out there are in this scenario. So if you can just identify the carrier type and it's not a cell phone, 9 times out of 10, that's your prioritization that this is a victim versus a worker.
When we talk about human trafficking, you definitely started on a point I really like: phone numbers. Even the smartest person is going to screw that up sometimes. So generally, what happens is you have the handler or the pimp. He's got his phone, and all of the ads for these girls online, they're going to come back to that phone or many phones. Now, if he's smart, he's going to have multiple numbers and things like that. The thing is, they don't get a new number every single time they post an ad or something like that. So they will screw up, or sometimes intentionally do it. Also, one thing that's kind of cool about the human trafficking crowd is they're not always the smartest. I mean, it's true of all sort of, crime groups, but these guys, that's an area they screw up. So you have the phone number, and then you also have the Venmos, the Cash Apps, the PayPals, that kind of stuff that are linked to the ads. And a lot of times what you'll see, it's a good indicator of a trafficking victim versus a sex worker, is you'll see maybe a Cash App that says, sexy Angela. And then but the girl's name in the ad is like, Patricia or something. And that's a good indicator that why would that be a different name? And that world, they do kind of go by different things and stuff, but that's an indicator. So then you start with like what Dan was talking about, where we take the phone number and we can see information about the phone, but the other things we can see connected to the phone number a lot of times are, what's the Cash App connected to it? What's the Skype connected to it? What else is here? Sometimes that can be a dead end, but even if it is a dead end, if we're seeing the same number across multiple ads, that still ties them together. So all we need is a data point across any of those ads. to figure something out. So a good example of a data point like that would be, an alias for a PayPal or for a Cash App. And from there, a lot of times we can go from that alias and possibly find something else that's connected to. I've seen Duolingo many times connected, that people kind of just forget about that, I guess, and they're trying to learn a language or do something. And then that helps you start unraveling, who possibly is behind that. It's a relatively straightforward workflow. And then you get into the more nuanced approach of, like, if you've got hotel rooms, what do the hotel rooms look like? What do are we, how do I differentiate between sort of just a sex worker and someone who's being trafficked? Things like, do you see a track mark on her back? Somebody who's a sex worker is not going to have a track mark in their back ever. And so there's little things like that you look for, and the accumulation of all of that information, it makes it much easier to piece together the network and who's behind it. And the more sophisticated ones have multiple layers too. You'll have handlers and you'll have people they report to, and that's where things get pretty interesting. But one of the things about that particular world is they have to sell their product online, and that gives us insights, from an OSINT perspective.
The visual intelligence analysis is something that should never be underestimated. For example, in Europe, you see a lot of those sex workers and human traffic sex workers, their faces being blurred, but you will see the same lingerie, let's say, across multiple platforms in different language, in different countries, or they will use the same picture for their German advertisement as their, let's say, Belgian advertisement. It's the same. So the visual intelligence is really important, but also just looking at, for example, a power outlet could tell you where the picture was originally taken, because power outlets all around the world may look different. Little niche things that could help you pivot, or different girls, same rooms, those kind of small.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. That's a really good one right there. Yeah, like, you see the same room.
Is she taking the picture, or is someone else taking the picture? That's one of our rules for sure. And then the wallpaper. What's the room look like? Does that give us, a hotel brand, right?
Yeah, and that's also interesting when it comes to. But this reminds me of the time when I did child abuse cases, so child pornography cases, where you would see that people were taking to hotels, young kids, but the carpeting of most hotels is unique per hotel or hotel chain, and that will help you at least narrow down where someone was at that moment in time.
Yeah. That's an excellent one, Nico. Some of the worst offenders I've ever heard of, I can think of two different cases where it was a bed, a sheet, a bed, like a comforter, and carpet. Those were the two things, and the visual aspect of that is incredibly important. If you can engage a target too, you can learn a lot through that as well. And that's another thing about communicating with these people is you can, if you have the ability to communicate with them, depending on your role, whether law enforcement or what, there's a variety of techniques we can use to, identify information, maybe an IP, maybe a cell tower, maybe a lat long, things like that, by just talking a little bit with them. So.
One funny thing that comes to mind immediately is that at a moment in time when I did these cases, we were allowed to phone them. We phoned them on hours where they did not work. Why? Because we wanted to hit their voicemail, because their voicemail was the pimp's voice and not the girl's voice. So we knew that.
That's good. That's a good one.
That's a good one.